Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil Ekalona, and this is Nashville. All right, the holiday season is here, and a lot of folks are preparing to spend time with family and friends. This means conversations will take place, conversations that can be hard to manage. Be it politics or personal, boundaries are often crossed when it comes to talking with family. This increased level or arduous discourse has led to a lot of people becoming estranged from their families. They cut themselves off, creating isolation and mixed feelings. So what's leading people to disconnect from folks with differing viewpoints, even if those people are family members? How does the fracture of an interpersonal relationship impact the larger community? Also, what are ways for us to connect? How can we use the events of today and the holiday season to draw closer to one another? We have some guests and experts here to talk about the topic, but we also want to hear from you. So give us a call at 615-760-2000 to answer this. How are you preparing to connect with others this year? Are you going to be around someone who you've had a difficult time with in the past? What will you do to bridge that divide? Again, call us at 615-760-2000. That's 615-760-2000. Now I'd like to introduce our first guest, Frankie Facilla. She is a professional counselor who also educates other counselors at Walden University. Frankie, welcome to This Is Nashville.
Thank you so much.
Really appreciate you being here. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the stressors that are impacting your clients' mental health. Tell me this, how do economics, politics, and the differences in viewpoints, how are that impacting people who are seeking counseling?
This is such a great question. And I think one of the things that I've seen over my 15 years of practice has been really an increase in stress about external, geopolitical, economic, national political things that are affecting individual people. And so all of that feels very out of control, I think, for most folks. And so when we think about what they're coming in with in the counseling room, it's really a desire to exert some kind of control over that stress. And I think one of the ways that people can do that is really by trying to control their own personal network and who they're associating with, and sometimes avoiding conversations that feel too heavy or too big, or like there's no way that we can actually talk. And when we think about how much people really rely on social media for connection as well, I think we see there that people, as you know, we get into the echo chamber or the bubble of what we see on social media, which is curated to only show us the things that we are clicking on or looking at or want to see. And so there starts to be this real rift between an individual person and how they process and perceive all of the different factors that are affecting their own stress and the lack of information they're getting maybe about other perspectives within that.
Have you seen, you've been practicing for a while, have you seen this kind of isolationist approach grow over the years?
Yes, I have seen it grow. I think there's more of a struggle with how to even start a conversation, to the point that often I think people don't. There's really more of a movement to, we don't talk about that. If that comes up, we're going to leave. We're going to delete someone off of our social media. We're going to not go to that interaction. We're going to find the one safe topic we can find to talk about that's not even going to approach that zone.
You mentioned people like seeking counseling to get a sense of control over the stressors. And I just remember a quote, my dad, advice he gave me when I was 10. He said, don't worry about the things you can control, and don't worry about the things you can't control either. Tell me this, how are you hearing people cope with internal conflict? Because that advice from my father to this day continues to help me cope with it.
Yeah, so you're asking, how do people cope with the conflict within themselves about this? Yeah, I think people honestly are really struggling, and we see a lot of, there's this movement around self-care. We hear the term self-care a lot, and what's interesting about the idea of self-care is that there's not really consensus on what is self-care. even in the research, we don't really know what that means. It could mean a lot of different things. So I think people are kind of grasping at this idea of self-care, which sometimes, unfortunately, I think can actually drive up stress because it can feel like, okay, well, now I'm also not doing enough self-care. And so let me add that to the list of things that I can't control, ironically, because it can feel pretty nebulous. And when we think about economic anxiety, the fact that people are working multiple jobs, people are taking care of families, there's just not really downtime anymore. We don't have that ability to really invest back into ourselves and self-soothe the way we want to.
We're talking about connecting with others over the holiday season. How do we engage in conversations with those who don't share our perspectives? And we want to hear from you. So call us up 615-760-2000, 615-760-2000. And again, with that note, listeners, I know that what some people may share is of a very personal nature. You don't even have to give us your name. Tell us a situation, ask a question or a comment. We have experts here to listen to you. Now, Frankie, you work and train counselors as well. And, you know, in their practice, a lot of counselors are mostly hearing from one person's perspective about a situation. Tell me this, how do you coach counselors in offering feedback that when they hear something coming from one person's perspective and that well, that perspective has a natural bias, how do you advise counselors to address a situation like that?
This is a great question. And I think, unfortunately, counseling, as you just described, is this endeavor of trying to learn about the experience of a person through only one person's perception and brain. And so I think when we think about the spectrum of good to bad counseling or maybe good to mediocre counseling, there can be a tendency to really overly rely on that one perspective and almost kind of think about it from the lens of, okay, this person's coming to me with these conflicts with these different people. Let me advise them about maybe different strategies to deal with those conflicts. But I think a better version of counseling and the way that I try to help coach people to move towards is really thinking about, okay, we know that this stuff is going on outside of you. What does that mean internally? How does that affect you on the inside? What are the values that you most want to align with, and how can we get you there? And that sort of circumvents the overemphasis on hearing only this one perspective from one person. And I do think one struggle that counselors have, understandably, is there was kind of an idea in the field at one point that we wouldn't bring any of our own personal opinions or views to the session. And I think something that we're finding valuable as we move forward in time is actually, as the relationship builds with your client or patient, to begin to bring some of your own views into the session and maybe even put out there some things that might spark disagreement from the client so that you can actually work with that in session and maybe use that as a safe place to have disagreement exist even in a session.
Expound on that a little bit more for me. Like, why is it important? Because I've only gone to a few therapy sessions. I know many people who have gone for a limited time and some who've gone for decades. A lot of times, like you said, the therapist, the counselor can take the side of the person they're there to help. That only makes sense. What are the benefits of that counselor offering some of their personal perspectives, an anecdote, a story, perhaps being in a very similar situation to their client? How can that help? How can this change in approach help the client out?
So the core of what works in a therapy or counseling relationship is connection with another human being. The reason that counseling matters is because it gives you a professional space, a safe, contained space to actually heal in relationship with another person. And that client that's there may not have that in any other realm, or they may not be good at that. And so I think when we bring ourselves as counselors into the room, there's boundaries around how we do that and how we disclose certain things. But the more we can bring our true self into the room professionally to really talk, and there's some debate in the field about how much we should do this, but to really engage with the person as a human being as well as a professional, that can create healing right there in that relationship so that we're not deflecting or thinking only about how that person should deal with stuff outside of the session.
I want to get back to what you were saying about self-care. There's a lot of talk about self-care. we necessarily don't understand or know what self-care is, which has given a lot of people cause to claim self-care for something, particularly when they're in a difficult situation. And a lot of our self-help, it focuses on individual growth and development. How can counselors, are counselors keeping community in mind when they're helping and counseling their clients?
I think it depends on the person, but more and more, I think what we're learning about how we heal in today's world is it needs to be through community. And so I think when we consider how do we build community, one of the things that I hope that counselors are thinking about is the complexities of that, because it sounds really easy to say, let's build community as a strategy forward. But how do you do that? In order to do that, you have to be vulnerable. You have to have conflict. You have to bring your real self. You have to get rejected sometimes in community in order to build it stronger. And so I think that this is going to be a really interesting and fascinating inroad to self-care that we haven't explored, I think, as much as we need to.
Yeah, and we're in the midst of a loneliness epidemic that's been going on long before the pandemic. I have a question I want to ask you, but let me ask you this. How much has the increase in value of social currency added and aided or exacerbated this loneliness epidemic that people are in? And I'm thinking specifically of social media. There's a social currency that comes with that. There's people who are really trying to be known for whatever they're known for. There's other people who kind of go on and are voyeurs to a certain respect. But if someone has praise for you on social media, if someone has a condemnation of you on social media, your reputation is going to take a hit one way or the other. How much is that adding to this loneliness epidemic and the stresses that people are feeling these days?
I think it adds a lot. And I think one of the most stark things that comes to mind for me with this is how much we rely on social media to the exclusion of other ways that we connect with people. So, and I think the economic stressors that we're under as a society as well contribute to this. You know, we were talking earlier about people are working multiple jobs, taking care of families. People don't have the time to really invest in community like they used to. And it's also harder to invest in community than it is to hop on social media, post a photo, and get likes. And so when we need that positive validation, which we all do, everybody does, it's such an easy inroad to get that on social media, but it doesn't have the tether or the teeth into real connection with people. And so like you said, you can be really praised or you could be really criticized on social media and ostracized on social media. And it's a one-dimensional viewpoint of you. It's not like you have the opportunity to really engage in dialogue with your social media followers.
The holidays are here. What are some ways that how people can look out for themselves and others, especially as we get to winter? A lot of people are spending more time alone or in the house, not necessarily out engaging in community, socializing with each other. But it's also at the time where there's a lot of holiday parties and a lot of get-togethers. What should we keep in mind as we enter into these social spaces, also in the solitary spaces where we are alone?
This is a great question. I think one of the things I've learned is that how we take care of ourselves is very personal. And so it doesn't have to look, for me, the way it might look for you. And I think there's these broad brush statements that we tend to make that people can easily try to apply to themselves that don't work. So, for example, if you're an introverted person and you need to build community, you have some invites to some parties, but you also are struggling with your time and energy balance and you're feeling really stretched. I think you can be intentional about where and how you engage with people. You can say no to some of the invites and say yes maybe to others. I just encourage people to have this balance of not all or nothing. Because I think what can happen is when we get overwhelmed, we start to retreat into ourselves and we start saying no to everything, perhaps. Or we may go too far into it and start saying yes to everything. And I think it's important to have a balance and decide, where can I say no and I'm okay with the trade-off? Because there is going to be a trade-off. If you say no to something, you're giving something up. But where are you okay with that and where are you not okay with that?
Thank you so much for being here. Frankie Ficilla is a counselor and educator at Walden University. Again, Frankie, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to hear from an extrovert about the increase of estrangement from parents. We'll also hear from a Nashville resident whose family sticks together during gatherings while talking about a diversity of beliefs on religion, politics, and social issues. And we want to hear from you, so give us a call, 615-760-2000. Stay with us. This is Nashville.
Funding for This is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil Colonna, and this is Nashville. Gaslighting, boundaries, and narcissists. Social media and daily conversations are flooded with language pulled from therapy, and the generic advice is often used to encourage distancing yourself from others in hopes of improving your own mental health. This shift in culture coincides with an increase in children becoming estranged from their parents. Listen to this clip from a psychologist about the trends he's seeing nationally.
One of the ways that it has changed is required for parents to be much more kind of psychological and conscientious in terms of how they are raising their children or how they're engaging with them, particularly once they're adults. They can't guilt trip them. They can't say what they're owed or obligated in the way that they might have in earlier generations. They have to accept the fact that nothing compels an adult child to have a relationship with a parent beyond that adult child's desire to have that relationship, and that the relationship's not going to be predicated on feelings of guilt or responsibility or obligation or duty. It's going to be based much more upon whether or not that relationship is something that feels good to that adult child or is in line with their ideals about their own boundaries and mental health. Typically, when an adult child cuts off contact with the parent, they also cut off contact and access to the grandchildren, which may be a tragedy for all parties involved.
That was psychiatrist Joshua Coleman, who has personal experience being estranged from his adult daughter. Now, after he got married and had more children, his daughter and he became estranged, as I mentioned. During that time, estrangement wasn't a popular topic, and he was left with really pretty unhelpful advice, kind of like, remind her of all the good things you did sort of thing. And while they've reconnected now, Coleman says that there's a place for being protective of self, but becoming more individualistic, also makes our society much more fragile. So how has your relationship with your parents changed since you became an adult? Was there a specific moment that caused a shift in your desire to be in contact with your parents? We want to hear from you. How does this impact your family's connection? Call us at 615-760-2000, 615-760-2000. And again, you do not have to share your name. So what about families that have a diversity of perspectives and stay in close relationships? Why and how do they navigate the differences while doing that? Now I want to talk to a Murfreesboro resident whose Mexican heritage holds family in high regard. Elvin Angeles was born to two Mexican immigrants. His recent elections and in the States and in Mexico have sparked a lot of conversation in his family about immigration and LGBTQ plus issues. And I'd like to welcome Elvin to This is Nashville. Elvin, thanks for being here, my friend.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so describe your family to us real quick.
There's mom and dad and mom's side and dad's side, but just kind of like diving into describing them, they both came from very poor backgrounds. Again, like they came out of two different villages, which were side by side. One was El Pondo and the other one was El Cubo. Dad lived out of a shack. His dad passed away at a very early age. When he was 8, he was the second oldest of 5 at that time. So he just kind of had to put on the big boy pants and start working, figuring out how he's going to provide for his younger siblings. And for my mom, she was the oldest, but both of her parents were still involved. Mm-hmm. They were still together and they were still alive. So them growing up kind of really the basic necessities for them were like shelter, food, and then like the emotional necessity or the understanding that all came later. They first had to survive, and even coming to America, they were still on that survival instincts. And so, instead of like thriving, they're just like, we need a roof. We got to make sure we can feed our kids and everything else. And just even speaking with like other friends who have immigrant families, they've come with that same survival instinct and just the idea of like, we need to thrive in this state because there's more things provided here.
Your parents have pretty different viewpoints due to their experience. Can you give me a little bit of a primer or an explainer of where your parents are coming from?
Their viewpoints get a little complicated at times depending on how and what is brought up. For instance, like the elections in Mexico. Now I'm leaving office. Now we have Sheinbaum, our first female president in Mexico. I know when that conversation first came up and they had the other people who were running, my father was the idea like, can we really have a woman like putting all these people in place? Like she's going to have to run a country. She's going to have to engage with other countries and discourse and have discussions. And that's where my mom is like, what? Just having more of a, trying to provide more of a, what would be the word for it? Just help. Like the idea of like, you have a woman always behind a man. They always say like behind a strong man, there's always a stronger woman helping them. And just the idea is like, what is so wrong about having a woman running a country? What's so wrong about her? Or where does the doubt come from? So that was a big thing. And even like in Mexico, like the idea of machista, or being machisto. Just there's always like the idea of like having a man first and then the female like behind that. So there was a lot of just dialect between that, and as the elections came through and she was now then endorsed by Ambriehl, that's when everything just started being taken back. It's like, oh, okay, maybe she can do this. She has support by him. It's like, oh, maybe we can, have a female president.
So your family is pretty open with these sorts of discussions. Are there ground rules or like informal ways that your family navigates these differences when you're gathering and talking about this stuff?
No. Everything's just up for discussion. Usually the common rule is just nobody like yells at each other, tries not to step on people's toes, or if there is a difference, we try to just wait, let the person finish and then the other person speaks. With my family being a little more divided, we have like Christians, Catholics, Jehovah's Witnesses, and we have some Jewish family as well. A lot of things are just kind of stem from that religious belief and that culture. I know they all came up as Catholics, and then coming here, everybody kind of start finding their different truth.
Yeah. Listeners, we do want to hear from you. How was your relationship with your parents? How has that changed since you've become an adult? Was there a specific moment that caused a shift in your desire to be in contact with them? How does this impact your family's connection? Call us 615-760-2000, 615-760-2000. You can call us anonymously, y'all. Trust me. You can trust me. Okay, so like tell me this, Elvin. You grew up around these different political viewpoints, a lot of different religions, yet you grew up in an environment where your parents encouraged you all to talk about these things in a civic manner. How does your experience growing up and being in these environments, how has that shaped your perspective currently?
Just becoming more empathetic and just try to understand where people are coming from. Being a religion background or culture native, just having that understanding and just basically that, just trying to hear the person out. Why do they feel that way? Why are they so strong against LGBT? Why are they so strong against a female president? Just hearing people out, trying to understand it, and then just giving everyone that space.
You're 28 years old, right?
Yes, sir.
How do you find taking that approach? How do you find that working with your peers?
Same concept, just hearing people out and just trying to understand where they're coming from, or where those beliefs come from, either from their parents or something generational. Being like, again, coming from my parents, the idea of like, hey, like the man's always supposed to provide. The woman's supposed to be behind you and so forth. But even like in my relationship with my wife and being married, when I was like out of a job, she was providing, and I was just able to also have that fortitude with my wife, because I know like my parents are like, what are you doing? You're falling behind. She's doing this. What are you doing?
Yeah.
And so forth. But it was nice to kind of like once moving out and just having that relationship. She was like, hey, I can help you. You'll get back on your feet. You'll figure this out. We got this.
Now, we were talking about individualism a little bit with our previous guest in the top of the hour. And, American culture heavily emphasizes individualism. While, your Mexican heritage and others, they hold community and family in very high regard. How do you find that balance when you're making your own decisions? How are these like two values coming up in your life?
Going back to what you said about setting boundaries and especially with family and that being such a big dynamic, like you're so used to saying, yeah, I can take care of that. I'll make that phone call. I'll do this. I'll go run that. But just setting boundaries and trying to understand of like having a overload of saying yes too much to my family or trying to help too much of my family and forgetting about my duties between me and my relationship and my wife or just things that I need to take care of. And for that individualism, sorry, it is something that's grown bigger here in the U.S. because I know like in Mexico, a lot of families still live together. Mm-hmm. You have uncles, aunts, grandma, everybody under that same roof. And as people start moving over here, people start realizing, I can live in my own place. I can't have my own apartments. Mom and dad can be down there. I'll go see them once a week. But it's even for our parents, like having to understand that that's also a thing that's starting to, I wouldn't say come apart, but just also them understanding like, okay, my kids now need their space. What do I do with my time? And even like asking my parents, like, what did you guys do today? Just having that individualism, giving them their time, and they'll either go to the park or do other things.
Do you feel like your exposure to these two different cultures and their value of traditionalism is helping you to, for lack of a better term, meld or mesh both into something where you feel like you can constantly be expressive, where you feel like you have the full autonomy and the time and the energy to address your individual needs, yet you still keep community and family in your heart and in your mind when you're making actions?
Yes, in that sense, but with the community needs and my needs for the family, I know like even with them trying to address things with them and just trying to see like if they can also understand where am I coming from, why I've been setting boundaries, why I've been also giving myself space, and also trying to explain to them like, hey, like you guys also are free to do this or free to address what you want to address with me if you're having any issues or you feel like I've been distanced or so forth with that, because they've also seen that not only with themselves, with their siblings who are also here, but with their friends who have come from that same village and they're having those same, not issues, but those same things going on in their family with their kids.
What's it like when you're talking to people in different generations, older folks, compared to people your age?
I feel it's kind of like that thing with people here in America. Like they just don't make them how they used to, or like people are, back in my day. But that same concept, just that parents are also like so used to a certain dynamic, a certain culture, and even like coming here to like with my peers and stuff, they would also just explain that they're like, how do I get my parents to understand this? How do I start beginning setting boundaries, or how can I get them to understand that it's not that I have anything against them, but I'm just burnt out because of work. I'm burnt out because of these relationships. I'm burnt out, so forth. Mm. So having those conversations, it's become a lot more common. It's become a lot more open. And even like with people of my generation or like older generation, they're just trying to understand that there's just kind of changes coming along with everything. Even just being here, like, wouldn't say leaving our culture, but just there's been shifts with different identities here to what is there.
You said something that you try to do is have empathy, and more importantly, I think, than having empathy is an understanding of where people are coming from. And this is what you apply to your life, which has helped you kind of be on this place in between two worlds, so to speak. Do you find like your peers or just other people really have that desire to understand other folks and where they're coming from? And I'm thinking in terms of this most recent election, people took very strong sides.
Yes.
And they remain on those strong sides, which is causing the fracturing of relationships, the breaking up of families, the estrangement from others and loved ones. It takes a level of understanding to really get where someone is coming from, even if you don't agree with that. Are you finding a lot more people are taking that approach, or is that something that's pretty rare? Are you one of the rare ones?
I can't say I'm a rare one, but I can say it is rare to see out in the wild. Just having conversations, it's very sometimes feeling like echo chambers. Just like if you don't agree with them or if you're not on the same page, then they start to disassociate or try to I don't know if I can say isolate, but push you out. Because no, like he believes in this. How could you do? And just all that stuff. Because with peers, like my empathy coming from aside from my parents, but also just due to all the religious changes in my life growing up, being Christian, Catholic, and Jehovah's Witnesses, just having, here's your new Bible. I'm so sorry. Here's your new Bible.
Yeah.
We're switching churches again. Here's your new Bible. So, but going to all those different places and just seeing like a lot of people having the common goal. They just want to have a fulfilling life, a happy life. They want to find their truth. And so that was something that kind of stemmed from that empathy, just knowing that even though we're in different churches, different Bibles, what have you, culture, we all aim usually for the same goal.
Now, do you have kids?
No, sir.
You planning to?
Later in life.
How are you thinking about, I know it's a very difficult question because you're not there yet, maybe 10 years, however long away. But are you having thoughts and ideas of how you will raise your kids given your experience in the world today?
Yes. Just a lot of dialect and trying to also, now in day and age, there's books and stuff I can read. Not saying it's going to make you a perfect parent, but just also understand that kids will have their own identity. Everybody will always have their own identity, no matter how much your parents try molding you, how many churches you go to and all these different things that influence you. You will begin to mold yourself by the interactions you have, by the experiences, rejections, failures, everything. Everything will just start growing into who you will be. And with that, just having more peace of mind, just knowing that I can see what I can provide and just let my kid just develop as well.
Last question for you. Say you are, say someone's listening and they are about to get together with family, apprehensively, or go to an event, a little bit nervous about it because of some of the people who will be there and their quote unquote history with them. What do you advise to them? How can they approach that setting and that situation and come out feeling a little bit better because they were able to begin to build a bridge?
It's a two-way street, that's for sure. Because you can try to be empathetic, you can try to be respectful, and maybe that the other person isn't budging or just isn't helping. But going in and trying with the open mind, like where do those thoughts come from? Is this something generational, culturative, or is just something that they've just been holding on to due to an experience they've had? And then just once you start unwinding that and kind of figuring out like, oh, this is why you feel about this way. Or, have you also understanding some people only have one-sided vision of certain things just due to their experiences. And then just trying to open up that dialogue with what you can. And then again, just being understanding.
Do you feel like we're actually listening to each other, or are we just waiting for a turn to talk a lot of times?
I think it can turn into like gotcha moments, especially with this political climate and everything. Like, he said it. There it is.
Yeah.
I think people listen, but they're active listening for something they want to hear.
And rather than actively listening to the person to get what they're expressing.
Yes.
I want to thank you so much for being on the show, sharing your experience and giving us some really sage and sound advice. Really appreciate it, Elvin.
Thank you. Thank you guys for having me.
Elvin Angeles, thank you again. All right, we're going to take one more break. When we return, we're going to talk with a Vanderbilt expert about how to stay curious when talking with someone who has a difference of opinion. And we want to hear from you again, so give us a call, 615-760-2000, 615-760-2000. It's your turn to talk. We'll be right back. I'm Khalil Kulona, and this is Nashville. Today, we've been talking about navigating differences in viewpoints in relationships. We learned about how counselors advise individual clients to care for themselves. We also kind of talked about how parental estrangement is increasing and how one family is leaning into staying close-knit in our ever-increasingly individualistic society. Now let's end the episode by talking with a Vanderbilt expert who's leading conversations around civil discourse. Amy Huffman is the executive director at Dialogue at Vanderbilt University. I'd like to welcome Amy to This is Nashville. Amy, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate you being here. And listeners, we do want to hear from you. So far, you haven't called, but I trust that one of you will. Call us at 615-760-2000 to let us know how you engage in civil discourse. Are you having a hard time talking with a specific person or a group of people? Do you want to learn how to talk with others and hold conversation that are steeped in respect? Again, call us 615-760-2000. I promise it won't hurt. All right. Now, Amy, can you give me a good example of what civic discourse is?
Yeah, I think civil discourse is really when we can have respectful conversations across difference. And I think that looks like, one, when we're not afraid to really express our point of view, even if we think somebody might disagree with us, where we can really listen and pay attention to people and hear them, even if their perspectives are not ones that we own, where we can be open to changing our mind and engage in vigorous debate. So one of the things we've done at Vanderbilt with our Civil Discourse Lab is really try and experiment with some new formats and opportunities for students to really engage in that kind of healthy, productive disagreement. So one thing we did this summer is we had the entire Vanderbilt football team come to our office right in the middle of their training. They got off the bus, they came in, all of them, and they sat in, we had them sit in a circle in a room. And we had them debate the topic that was offense is harder than defense.
Oh, wow.
And so while that sounds like a light topic, that was actually a real source of identity for every person in the room.
Yeah.
And it was a really fun sort of experiment to see. We had 2 people lined up to sort of argue for it, 2 against. And then after that, it was really anybody could speak and share their views. I wasn't sure if people were going to say, oh, this is sort of hokey, but people got really into it. They were leaning in. There was not a cell phone out. And it was really a chance to give students an opportunity to practice what it is like to share your point of view, sort of put yourself out there a little bit, even if you know half the room is going to disagree with you. And then for the other half to really fully listen. And so at the end of that conversation, what I think it produced is it's not like everybody agreed. The half the room's still going to think offense is harder than defense. Yeah. But that people walked away with a greater understanding, I think, an appreciation for someone's point of view. So that's one example. We've also had others where, our college Democrats and college Republicans, 2 groups on campus that have really different views, have been able to come together this semester and have debates where they invite other students. The presidents of those 2 organizations have managed to forge a relationship, a friendship that's enabled us to have pretty intense debates around topics like abortion and immigration and federal bureaucracy. And I think that's really important that we're finding ways to still come together and talk about things where we know we're going to disagree, but how can we do that in a way that is respectful and that gives us some grace for other people, where we don't just assume the worst in them, but really give them a chance to express their views.
One could potentially say what your experiment and lab and conversation with the Vandy football team proved to be fruitful as that upset win over Alabama.
I was going to say, we're not going to take credit.
This is the best season they've had in a long time.
We got them started. I know. We laughed about that. But yeah, it was, who knows if it wasn't an important sort of team building exercise.
Maybe you can do the same thing with the Titans.
I don't know. We could try.
All right, we're going to go to the phones. Monica has called. Monica, you are my hero. Thank you for calling. What would you like to share with us?
Thanks for having me. I want to share that my family is now, we're 5 generations. My dad is in his 80s, and we have the grandchildren.
Oh, Monica, what happened?
Just stay in the conversation.
Okay, Monica, can you start over? You kind of broke up a little bit.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm in my car. What I want to say is that our family just stays in the conversation, and they have been for years. And in our expanded family, and there's a lot of us here, there's a few step family or blended family. We've had some family members, there's LGBTQ plus in our community, in our family, and we have some different racial experiences. And so people are just putting that commitment to family and that saying, I love you more than I don't understand you. And some people, when it's right, they're having the conversations of, help me understand what you're going through or what you're feeling in this situation. So that helps sometimes. And sometimes we just don't have the conversations because we know, like your other speaker, I loved so much of what he was sharing. Sometimes we just know there's hot buttons and we need to not talk about those. Let's talk about other things.
Okay, Monica, hold on.
The commitment to family really has been the main thing, and it's working. And I'm just so grateful.
And that's wonderful to hear. You hold on the line, Monica, because I do want to come back to you.
I can't hear you. I'm sorry. It's not working great in my car.
Okay, that's what happens. This is what it's like when I talk to my mom. All right, so... But Monica said something very important. She said, take the perspective of, I love you more than I don't understand you.
Yeah, Khalil, I think what she said that we're seeing is that we can see real commonality in values. Like they share that value of family. And then that's more important than the disagreement. I think that what we've seen in a lot of where we start our workshops is saying, like, where do we have commonalities and values? We may disagree on, a hot topic like gun safety, but underneath it all, we may share the value of like, we care about safety. I want to feel safe, or I don't feel safe when there are guns. But I think we can always come back to saying underneath it, so often we can find a connection in the values that we do. And it sounds like that's what's happening for Monica. And she maybe knows, like, where's the line that they're going to say, we're going to stay in this area where we feel like we can be productive.
Monica, can I ask you this? Who is leading the charge in setting up these ground rules for familial discourse?
I don't. Gosh, that's a good question. And I would say that we're kind of finding our way because, I've seen my own father, who is in the elder generation, continue to choose family over the things that he doesn't understand. So he's been leading in his, willingness to change or even just be quiet. Even if he doesn't agree, he's just quiet about it. My stepmother came into the relationship with my dad already having had some of those conversations in her own family that were important. And so, and I've lived internationally, so I've had a very diverse set of experiences that caused me to ask questions. And so we've brought our diverse experiences into the family, and we just have asked more questions or at least tried to be sensitive. I think that's kind of the thing is we keep saying, I want to be open to other people's perspectives. I want to recognize that my family member is so much more than the part of them I don't understand. And eventually I will understand, or it doesn't matter because the family and the relationship is more important.
One thing I hear you saying, which, again, we really emphasize and I think is so critical, it feels like there's a lot of people in your family that are bringing a sense of curiosity and you're asking questions. You say, how did you come to believe that? What is it? Help me understand your perspective. And that's really one of the keys we see in civil discourse is how do you bring that sense of curiosity over judgment? Because behind it, you have to say, like, gosh, I wonder. A question we found to be really helpful. How did you come to believe that? Is there an experience in your life that influenced how you believe that? Because I think a lot of times that help us unwind, like what are people's stories? What has happened to them? Like their perspectives and their experiences in their life? Or again, like what are their values? You can sort of get at, like by asking questions, I think you can get to that greater understanding. And it sounds like that's one of the things, Monica, that's worked well for you and your family.
Yeah. Monica, I really want to thank you so much for giving us a call and sharing your perspective and the story of your family. We hope you have a happy holiday season. And if I ever see you out, I'm buying you coffee.
Awesome. I look forward to it. We can have a great conversation.
It'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you. Bye now. Okay. So, Amy, tell us, what are some ground rules to having a productive conversation? I feel like that's a ridiculous question to ask, but it's a very appropriate question to ask in December of 2024.
Yeah, I think that a couple of ground rules are, one is the sense of respect. I think you want to walk into a conversation and agree ahead of time that we're going to both approach this from respect for each other. I really think a desire and a willingness to listen. I think that's a skill I keep coming back to because I think it's something we just in our society today, so often we're not really present. How often are we like looking at the phone, emailing? It's like really hard to give somebody your full attention. And I think when you do, that really opens up the ability to have an honest, direct conversation. But I think that's an important part of the ground rules. Again, I'm going to go back to saying bringing that sense of curiosity. It's like I don't want to go into a conversation with the goal of saying, I'm going to prove I'm right. I'm right, and that's it. And by the end of this conversation, I'm going to convince you. I think, how can you go into a conversation with that sense, a commitment to openness, a commitment to curiosity to say, I might learn something. And that's sort of the humility to say, I don't know everything. I'm going to go in with that approach. And I think if you can agree on some of those ground rules, I think you end up having a conversation that feels like fulfilling and productive.
On the individual level, what would you advise someone to do when it comes to, I'm not going to say, controlling their emotions when we're getting in conversations? That is a big thing.
Yeah.
And what do we need to know as adults, as young adults, as older adults, as young children when we get into this?
Yeah, I think there's some real basics where I found myself in a conversation with a student who had pretty different views than me. And I was like, wow, I suddenly got a little bit nervous. You can feel your heartbeat a little bit faster. And I think we need to all give ourselves permission and space to slow down and take a breath and literally let ourselves just sort of, instead of escalating sort of intention or the emotions, giving ourselves that space to slow things down. I think, and also be okay with knowing that we don't have to know the answer. I think we tend to think in this very opinionated world, right? Cable news, social media, hot takes. I think we underestimate the degree at which I don't know how I feel on a lot of really complex issues, and that's okay. So I think giving ourselves as individuals that like freedom and that space to say, I don't know, that's a really good question. Let me think about that, or tell me more, like ask more questions. But I think that we need to give ourselves that freedom in that space.
The freedom to say, I don't know, but also the freedom to say, I may not permanently believe this.
That's right.
Or be in this stance. We tend to, the way I've approached this, and from my understanding is we tend to approach these conversations and feel like you believe this on Thursday. So in 10 years, you're going to still feel the same way. That's not how life works.
It's not. You know, one of my, someone who I really admire is a journalist named Amanda Ripley, and she wrote this book called High Conflict that talks about this sort of unhealthy conflict that we see now in society, where the hallmarks of that are like disdain and hatred and contempt. And that's really unproductive conflict, because that's the kind of conflict that can lead to violence. But we need to get back to this sense of like healthy conflict, which is okay. And like anger is okay. And one of the things she noted, she cited a study where you can call somebody and ask them about abortion, and depending on how you phrase the question and what on a different day you ask them, they may give you a different answer, which just goes to show that a lot of these things we're talking about in society are really complex. That we don't have this, like you said, permanent static view of a topic. And we are allowed to change our view depending on new information or how we feel or life experiences. And I think giving ourselves the freedom to say, oh gosh, I got new information, or I learned something new, or I just didn't think of it that way. I never thought of it that way until you shared that story. I think that will go a long way to helping us have more productive conversations.
A little bit earlier, you were talking about the heaviness and the constant bombardment from the 24-hour news cycle, our working schedules, our social schedules. We are always on the clock, even when we're sleeping.
Yes.
What can we do to give ourselves this grace and this space you're talking about, to slow down so we actually can be present when we're having a conversation with anyone about anything?
I mean, that is the $1 million question.
Yes.
I wish I had that easy answer. I mean, I've tried really hard to make small habits in my own life. And I've found that, I have, for example, I'm not on social media. I just have sort of made the decision for myself. It's just not productive or healthy for me. But I've tried to be really mindful in the past few months. I've just noticed my son is on me because he's like, Mom, you're looking at your phone. And so how can I come home and put my phone in a basket? Or how do you have certain times of the day I leave my phone out on the kitchen counter when I go to sleep at night? It's like I think we need these spaces from our devices, from news media, to the extent that we are someone that wants to give ourselves space to meditate or have some moments alone. Like I think those times where we are able to slow down, give ourselves space, take the brain off of all the thinking. It's really important. Again, I think it's hard to do. It's so easy to read and do in practice. Know you should do it, and really hard to do.
I got about 30 seconds left. Would you advise someone during this holiday season to go up and talk to a stranger?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things I love about Nashville is just the number of times I feel like I have these great conversations in the grocery store, in an elevator. I think it's those small moments of connection I actually think are really fulfilling. So, yeah, I don't think it has to be on any big topic. I think these small moments of connections, what do you do in this holiday season? Where do you find your best gifts? I think that'd be a great idea.
Amy Huffman is the Executive Director of Dialogue at Vanderbilt University. Amy, thank you for being with us. Really appreciate you sharing everything.
Yeah.
All right, and thanks to you for tuning in this hour. This is Nashville is a production of Nashville Public Radio. Today's episode was produced by Ambriehl Crutchfield. Thank you for all of your hard work. It was directed by Tasha A.F. Lemley. Our technical director and board operator is Liv Lombardi, but today Nina Cardona helped us out on the boards. Thank you, Nina. I owe you some cookies. Mary Mancini took care of the phones. The masterminds behind our theme music are LaRange and Namir Blade. You can listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get good podcasts. And the conversation does not end here. Tweet us at This Is Nashville. Find us on Instagram and tell us what you want from our show by filling out our quick survey online. You can also call us or leave us a message at 615-751-2500. That's a new number, y'all, so call us. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil A. Kulona. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody. And be good to each other.